man's most dangerous practice. And this is a continuation of the thoughts that are found in the previous chapters. You'll note that instead of saying lesson, it says lecture. This was a series of lectures given by Brother J. Ridley Stroop. And looking at the three factors, just by way of reminder, the three factors that were examined in considerable detail as to why do people not see the Bible alike is ignorance of the Bible, deceit, and then conceit. And that these three things are key in understanding why people do not see the Bible alike. And then in the bottom of that first paragraph, about a little over halfway down on the right side, it says, so long as a human being remains the victim of this triumvirate of his own weaknesses, that is being ignorant, being deceived, and being conceited about his own ignorance. As long as he remains a victim of these three things, he will be fettered like a slave to his own narrow human interpretation of the divine wisdom revealed in the Bible, and so long will continue the multitude of diverse ideas on numerous points of Bible teaching. In other words, the division is going to continue until all men are willing to give up their own ideas and accept the teaching of the Word and the will of God. Now look at the last paragraph. It says, will you and I ever become big enough to recognize our littleness? I love that statement. Will we ever be big enough to recognize our littleness? Will we ever be able to dethrone our weaknesses that blind us to the great things of life and the proper understanding of that wisdom which came down from above? And until we do, there is no hope for seeing the Bible alike, or rather there is no hope for understanding the Bible teaching. In other words, it's not just a matter of seeing the Bible alike, because there are a lot of people that see the Bible alike and they're all wrong. For example, there are tens of millions of Calvinists in this world who see the Bible alike. Doesn't make them right. There are a billion, so to speak. There are a billion Catholics in the world that see the Bible alike, at least what they're told they're supposed to believe. Doesn't make them right. And so I love that tag there at the end of that line. It's not just a matter of seeing the Bible alike. It's a matter of having a proper understanding of what the Bible teaches. Brother Woodson said, and I've never forgotten this, he said it in our Thursday night Bible class down at Winfield. He said, there is no, and I've used it a number of times, and I'm going to use it again. There is no such thing as two people who understand the Bible differently. Now let that sink in. There is no such thing as two people who understand the Bible differently. One or both does not understand, because the Bible teaches a thing. With regard to any particular topic, the Bible teaches a thing. All right? For example, let's just use the example of the one church. There is a body of Bible teaching on the one church. And if two people do not agree on that, or they see things differently on that, one of them is wrong, the other one is wrong, or they're both wrong. So one of them does not understand. And I'll talk about some of these things in a little more detail as we make our way through. And then I thought this was another great line, because if you recall from the outset of this teaching, of the study of this book, that Stroop was not only concerned with the difficulties in the diverse teachings of the religious world at large, that he was also greatly concerned with the diversity of teachings within the confines of the brotherhood. And if you recall, the book was written in 1949. So there were a lot of things going on in 1949 that we don't think about a lot today. If you recall, over and over again, he talked about, can a Christian participate in what he calls carnal warfare? Well, that was a big deal during World War II. In the days immediately following. That was a big deal. the matter of church autonomy, and is church autonomy violated by the cooperating church method or by the overseeing church method? Is church, our church is permitted to support orphans' homes and things of that nature. All those were giant issues in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and so you understand the construct of the book given its time frame. All right, for us today, and not that those things are not important. They are important. But there are other things that trouble the church today, and we'll talk a little bit about those as we go through. But the last two words on page 94 leading to 95. The important question is not how much you can tell your neighbor, but how much will you allow God to tell you? In other words, Stroop is warning us as members of the body of Christ that the purpose of our study is not so that we can learn something that we can straighten somebody else out. But rather, our study is done so that we can allow the Lord to straighten us out. And then from there, try to help somebody else. Try to teach somebody else. To have exchanges and correspondence with others. And then at the bottom of that first paragraph, top page 95, why have so many people come to believe that God has told them so many different things? Why is that? And then he says the human factors that are responsible for the existing conditions have already been discussed. But our answer remains incomplete and loses much of its practical value without the consideration of the major human practice through which these factors are developed and in which their blighting effects upon the lives of professed followers of Christ are most destructively wrought. It is the practice of comparing ourselves with others. He said, therein lies the most important factor. In these three previous subjects, he says the culmination of this, the most destructive pattern of thought and activity is the practice of comparing ourselves with others. And then he goes to 2 Corinthians 10 and verse number 12. And I believe he made I'm sure he's either using the King James or the American Standard. But he quotes Paul from the 2 Corinthian epistle. For we are not bold to number or compare ourselves with certain of them that commend themselves. But they themselves, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves with themselves, are without understanding. New King James says, are not wise. Walter, what if you got 2 Corinthians 10 verse? Somebody got King James. I think are not wise is the rendering. So that's what leads me to believe he's probably looking at maybe using the ASV in this particular text. But I want us to think about that just for a moment. It says, we are not bold to number or compare ourselves with certain of them that commend themselves. Now, a little bit later on in this same epistle, in 2 Corinthians, Paul makes a reference in chapter 12 and verse 11 about, in some renderings it says, super apostles, or most eminent apostles. I don't think he's talking about the other apostles. I think he's talking about men. I think the word apostle there means messenger in the general sense, and that Paul's talking about that there are men who come and have commended themselves to the church and built themselves up to the church. And if you read both Corinthian epistles, particularly chapter 9 out of the first one, and then chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13 out of the second epistle, you'll find that the Corinthians had embraced these, for lack of a better term, these popular men. These men of human renown of sorts. And Paul says, look, I don't care anything about those guys. But he gets to the end of this discourse here in chapter 12 and verse 11. He says, but let's just straighten this matter out once and for all. I'm not one whit behind any of these guys. Now, Paul was not commending himself to them. He was not comparing himself to them. He's just simply stating a fact. And then he goes on to say, truly the signs of an apostle were worked among you. In other words, these guys didn't do anything that's compared to what I did, obviously, that God did through me in your presence. And that alone should commend me to you. Kind of like what Jesus said. You know, if you don't want to believe me, at least believe because of the works' sake. In other words, you know, what your eyes have seen. Not just what you've heard me say, but what you've seen me do. And so Paul makes it says in no uncertain terms, I wasn't the least bit behind any of these guys that you think so much of. And then commends himself, I don't mean in a self-serving way, but explains himself in the sense that he worked the signs of an apostle among those people. And so they commended themselves, they measured themselves by themselves, compared themselves with themselves, and are without understanding. All right? We're going to talk about that phrase, understanding, without understanding, in just a moment. But Stroop says, look, he says, here are three things, three facts. They commended themselves. Number two, they measured themselves by themselves. Number three, they are not wise. They are without understanding. But he says, let's consider this in reverse order. He wants to talk about this idea of being without understanding. All right? A great place to start. Now, and this is, again, this Stroop's insightfulness just never ceases to amaze me. He just simply says they're without understanding. In other words, there are no derogatory adjectives added to it. Look at what Stroop says. It says, there are no harsh or cruel words of condemnation, no description of heinous crimes or acts of dishonor, no warnings against wicked thoughts or vile imaginations, but it's simply a description of a condition, that is, being without understanding, is a description of a condition which will permit indulgence in many evil practices, and that without any sense of guilt. Now think about that. Being without understanding will permit a man to participate even in the most heinous of acts without so much even a smidgen of guilt in his conscience. Now, I'm not just talking about in religious, but we can talk about religious acts. I mean, for example, in the Old Testament, Molech. What kind of activity marked the worship of Molech? That's right. Sacrificing children, literally burning them to death, frying them on a brass plate in his hand. You know, if I understand correctly, the Molech hand was outstretched like this, made out of brass, a fire built under it until it was red hot, and they put innocent babies on that and fried them to death. All right? Now, they did that without a smidgen of guilt. Now, these are God's people. We're not just talking about the Canaanites. We're talking about these were God's people who sacrificed their children to a pagan god without a smidgen of guilt. You know, what are the things? You know, what other things marked some of the idolatrous practices that Israel engaged in? There's one big one in particular that almost always marks idolatry. What is it? By the way, if you guess and you're wrong, I'm not going to throw you out. Thank you, Sean. Sexual immorality. Fornication, sexual immorality, was a hallmark of idolatrous worship. From the Old Testament all the way up into the days of with Paul at Corinth and Athens, and even John writing in his epistles, talking about fleeing, getting away, keeping yourselves from idols, and the associated activities of idolatry. the temple prostitutes and all of the things that were associated therewith. God's people participated in those things without a smidgen of guilt. By the way, if we read Revelation chapters 2 and 3, some in the church said, you tolerate that woman Jezebel, who teaches what? My people to eat things sacrificed to idols and what? To commit fornication. What about the situation at Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 5? A man has his father's wife, and you haven't mourned, but rather you've become conceited about your acceptance and your open-mindedness. They did that without a smidgen of guilt. Why? They were without understanding. Being without understanding permits all kinds of horrific acts, not only in the world, but even in the practice, I say practice of Christianity. People that would be professed believers. All right? Let me get back over my page. Page fell over. All right. Now, in the middle of page 96, I said we were going to talk about this phrase, without understanding. The word there, understanding, is a word that we have studied on a number of occasions. It's suniamai, or suniami. Sun meaning joined together, and then the last part is from the Greek noeo in the mind. All right, and so, but it's prefaced by not in the text. So they do not have things properly joined together in their mind. All right, there's the word. They are without understanding. Note the preceding sentence. It says, this is about the most hopeless and helpless state of human existence with respect to any sphere of human endeavor to which it applies. They are without understanding. And then he goes on and just has a litany of problems with the church at Corinth. It says their divisions, their fornication, their lawsuits, their misunderstanding of marriage, confusion over eating things sacrificed to idols, their desecration of the Lord's Supper, contention over spiritual gifts, and even the repudiation of the resurrection. That's 8 pretty big ones right there. Any one of those, look, think about this. Any one of those things would cause us to look at any congregation with a jaundiced eye, right? Even one of them. And yet, all of those things were present in the church at Corinth. All of them. They were without understanding. Now he says this, since similar divisions, contentions, and confusions are prevalent today among church people, even within local congregations and among people of unquestionable sincerity, is it not reasonable to believe that the source of much of our trouble is the same as that of Corinthians, without understanding? In other words, being without understanding led to all the problems that were in the church at Corinth. Right? And any of those things could be present today. But think about this. Think about this. Being without understanding leads to all kinds of confusion. I remember it's probably been I'm going to say it's been at least 15 years ago. I could go back and look it up. I was teaching here on the qualifications of the eldership and what the phrase believing children meant. And if the word children in the text demanded more than one child, or if one child satisfied the demands of the text. And the Bible teaches that one child satisfies the demands of the text. Well, some people didn't like that. And I had somebody, now here's a classic case of being without understanding. Rather than taking the textual proof that I had presented, and at least taking 5 minutes to look at it and study it, and formulate some type of reasonable response to it, Somebody caught me in the foyer of this church building with a Precious Moments Bible and opened up to the dictionary in the back and showed me what the word children means. Now, what kind of response is that? You're gonna pull out some child's Bible with a dictionary in the back, and you're going to show me a definition of children out of the back of a Precious Moments Bible, and that's your argument against 30 minutes of presentation of what the Bible says about the matter. By the way, this person never changed their mind about the matter. Never did change their mind about the matter. But you know what? Without understanding. And for lack of a better term, ignorant and proud of it. Doesn't want to know any better. If that's the best you got, you don't want to know any better. I'll go find me a dictionary somewhere that'll define the word the way I want it, and my mind will be made up without understanding. Why is it that there continues to be difficulty in the church over the subject of marriage, divorce, and remarriage? Without understanding. Does the Bible teach 5, 6, 7, 8 doctrines of marriage, divorce, and remarriage? I told you about the fellow that used to be the head of the Bible department at one of our universities, who told me that when he was the head of the Bible department, he hired 7 men and they all held different views of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And practically bragged about it. And my response was, it didn't make any of them right. It doesn't make you right. But, does the Bible teach even 2 doctrines? No. It teaches there's one teaching. There is one teaching. And if there's 2 teachings that are out there, one of them has to be wrong. But why do people teach 5, 6, 7 things about marriage, divorce, and remarriage? Without understanding. What about, I've already mentioned, the orphans' homes, the benevolence, the overseeing congregation, all those types of things. Why is there division in the church of that? Without understanding. Without understanding. And so, and then one, I was looking for Hugh Ellis. Hugh was telling me about visiting a congregation one time that when he went in, the first thing that somebody did was called him and said that when you take the communion, all the cups on the outside have alcoholic wine, and all of them on the inside have regular grape juice. And then he said that about 5 minutes later, one of the deacons came up and told him just the opposite. That all of them on the outside were regular grape juice, and all of them on the inside were alcoholic. And so he's like, man, I didn't know which one to pull. All right. The question is, why would somebody be so adamant? Why would somebody be so adamant about using alcohol, grape juice with alcoholic content in the Lord's Supper? Why would they do that? Without understanding. There's absolutely no justification for it. And a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do it. I mean, there are a ton of practical reasons why it shouldn't be done. But, how do you get to that point? Somebody's without understanding. Somebody's without understanding. So we can talk about all these things. Now note, bottom of page 96. Paul did not leave us to guess at the cause of this direful condition. It was the result of their own practice. They measured themselves by themselves, compared themselves with themselves. Why did this practice leave them without understanding? Because they took away the standard of measure. Man, that's, as old preachers say, that's it right there. They took away the standard of measure. I hear John and Mason and Eli and Dave down at East Side, and they're talking about engines and rebuilding and all this, and they start talking about phrases using terms like sixteenths and hundredths, and I don't mean that. I know what a 16th is, and I know what a 100th is, but in the course of the conversation, it don't mean a thing to me. It don't mean a thing to me. But if you're boring out a cylinder, in somebody's, Well, it's supposed to be so many hundreds. Why just use sixteenths instead? How's that going to work, John? That ain't going to work. That's not going to work. Because there's a standard there, and when you abandon the standard, you end up with a knocking engine, if it would even crank. When you remove the standard, anything goes. And especially the same goes with the Bible. When people remove the Bible as the absolute standard of faith and practice, anything is allowable. They removed the objective standard of measure. And then he expands. To speak more exactly, they individually replaced the sacred, unchangeable teaching of Almighty God, which was given to them as the standard of righteous living, with the varying, changing, conflicting practices of individuals. In 1897, I believe it was in November, might have been October, maybe October, could have been November of 1897, David Lipscomb wrote an article in Gospel Advocate titled, Serving God, Not Obeying Him. Serving God, not obeying Him. And what he set forth in that article, and it's kind of like this book. This book was written in 49, and it could have been written last year. His article was written 121 years ago, and it could have been written as if it was today. He said, herein lies the problem. He said, people have abandoned the Bible. Somebody in the church, because he's talking about 1897 is the very apex of the oncoming division of the Lord's church from the independent Christian church. The establishment of the missionary society, the introduction of instrumental music, eventually the introduction of women into leadership roles. I mean, this is the height of the controversy. And Lipscomb makes the point. He says, and I'll just summarize it or paraphrase, he says, to them the Bible doesn't mean anything. It just means whatever they want it to mean at that particular point in time. Either the Bible is a standard and it's to be read and believed and practiced as written, or it doesn't mean a thing. Is that right? And by the way, that goes for any doctrine. The Constitution, the current argument going on right now over the appointment of a Supreme Court justice is, are you going to appoint an originalist? Or are you going to appoint somebody that basically just says, we'll just make it mean whatever we want it to mean? Because that's basically the difference. That's in essence the difference in two views of the Constitution. Either you interpret it as it was written, or you allow society to change what you say it means. Well, people do the same thing. Been doing the same thing with the Bible. Either you interpret it as it's written, as it was intended, or you're just free to interpret it however you want. And that's what Stroop is getting at. People want what they want. They want what they want. And in so doing, they're willing to forsake the Bible as an absolute, unchangeable authority and exchange it for their own varying, changing, and conflicting practices. Now, bottom of page 97. I want to get to this real quick. Bottom paragraph. And this again was just so insightful. It says, it is true that when we measure their mistake in terms of consequences, it was an error of great magnitude. But when we measure it in terms of digression from normal acceptable human behavior, it shrinks to virtual insignificance. What he says is that the result of exchanging the Bible as an absolute body of truth for the desires of the individual leads to unspeakable and dire consequences. He says, but doing so as a comparative matter to human thought and action in general, everybody does. And he goes on to make his case. Now think about this. 1, 2, 3, 5 lines down from that last paragraph begins with all of our values. All of our values are relative and frequently change. We arrive at them through the method of comparison. One object is large or small in comparison to another. Now, when he says all of our values, he's not talking about our spiritual values. He's talking about how we value and measure things in general. All right? For example, if there are 90, it's not going to happen, but if there were 90 people here this morning, we'd say that's a big crowd, right? But if Jacksonville had 90 people, that'd be a small crowd. They'd be wondering where everybody is, because Jacksonville normally runs in the mid-200s, whereas we run in the mid-50s to mid-60s. And so you see, the value of the number 90 varies depending on where we are. We arrive at them by a model of comparison. He says, where actual trade or exchange is made is with regard to an evaluation. We compare a unit of measure for dimensions, but the actual price is paid by the quality as compared to something of a similar nature. I'll give you an example. I'm a Joseph A. Bank suit guy. You know why? Because they run their suits on sale for about $89 or $99. That's when I'm going to buy a suit. Now, anybody that pays full Joseph A. Bank price for a suit is a fool. Because they're always running sales on their suits. This suit cost $498, regular price. But a guy'd be an idiot to pay $498 for this suit. Because he'll just wait about 5 minutes, it'll be on sale online, and you can buy it. Right? For $99. Right? Well, they have different levels of suits from $500 to over $1,200. Right? The regular price that nobody pays. A friend of mine's a lawyer down in Houston, and he buys Joseph A. Bank suits. But he buys the suit that when it goes on sale is $200. And he told me, he said, I used to buy the ones that are $100, and he told me what used to happen to them after being dry cleaned so many times. And you know what? Same thing happens to mine when they're dry cleaned. But if you buy the $200 suit, it won't do that. In other words, the construction of the suit that he buys is better than the construction of the suit that I buy. And to him, it's worth it to pay the difference. To me, it ain't worth it. When my suit starts to come apart, I'll just shell out $90 and get another one and feel good about it. I just have a hard time shelling out $200 for a suit that I can wear 5 years when I can shell out $100 and wear one for 2.5 years and then shell out another $100 and wear it for 2.5 years. Right? But John can't work like that. We were just talking this week about the value of things versus the price of things. John could go to Walmart and buy all. By the way, y'all, big boy here's a mechanic. Okay, he's a mechanic. He's got a building full of tools. He could go to Walmart and buy his tools, right? But by the end of the week, he's going to go back and he's going to buy more because what the tools they sell at Walmart are not like Snap-on or is it Snap-on or one of these other better brands of tools. The question is, do you want to spend $20 on a wrench that you might get a half a year's use out of, or are you going to spend $50 on a wrench that'll last you, then you can pass it down to your kids? Not to mention the time that you save running to Walmart, going having to go get something new and not having it when you need it. You see, there's a difference in the price of things and the value of things. For me, on the suit deal, it's just not worth it. Maybe one day it will be. Maybe one day I'll buy me a $200 suit and I'll see the difference and I'll tell Kevin, you were right. It's all on, you were right. All right? Maybe not. But Stroop is trying to help us understand that there's a difference. There's a difference in the price of thing and a value of thing because there's a comparison. There's a comparison to be made. And so he talks about we pay, and by the way, he uses suits. That's why I use suits as an example, because he did say, we pay more for this suit because in some ways it is better than that one, or we think it is better. All right? I know Kevin's suits are better than mine. because he used to wear the suits that I wear. Right? But I just can't. John says I'm cheap. I'll find a deal on something and I just can't hardly pull the trigger, and John and David just sit there at the breakfast table and beg me to buy something. Because they know it's a good deal, and I know it's a good deal, but I just can't hardly bring myself to do it. But I did end up buying that tractor. And that was a good deal. And those guys were killing me day after day. All right? But that's just me. All right? But some things are obviously better than others. Therefore, the value of that thing is compared to the price of it. He says, in our lives, we know no other way to make value judgments. It's the only way to make value judgments is by comparison. And comparison can't just include the price of the thing. It has to be determined the value of the thing. And even in our estimate of personal qualities, we resort to the same practice. We have always measured ourselves by others. And then he goes on to prove this statement. It says, when we were children, we were shorter or taller, run faster or not as fast, throw farther or not so far. The facts had little personal significance and were just readily accepted. In other words, little kids don't worry about who's taller or who's shorter. They don't worry about who's faster or who's slower. They don't worry about who throws the ball farther or who doesn't. You go watch a T-ball game. Those things don't matter. Don't matter to those kids. Right? But as we get older, now all of a sudden, some of these things that when we were younger had no significance to us become very significant. How tall are you? How short are you? How thin are you? How big are you? How fast are you? How smart are you? And so our personal interests become a factor. All right? And then this is the one that really kills me. In the middle of that first full paragraph, about halfway down, it says, where it begins, later we learned. Get this. Later we learned it was not always best to excel, lest there be more demanded of us. I'll never forget, I think I've told you all this. Jeffrey was in high school and he brought home a report card that was just say less than stellar. Alright? Now no, you need to understand something. When it came to schoolwork, Shelby's a lot smarter than Jeffrey. Right? It's just the way it is. She's smarter than Jeffrey. I was smarter than my sister when it came to school. Right? It's just the way it was. But my parents, or my mom, never held my sister, never held me as the example of what my sister ought to accomplish in school. And we never held Shelby as the measure of what Jeffrey ought to accomplish in school. But Jeffrey was lazy. All right? And so the problem wasn't that Jeffrey didn't make as good of grades as Shelby did. The problem was Jeffrey didn't make as good as grades as Jeffrey could make. See, the standard is not somebody else. The standard is what are you capable of? So what was Jeffrey's response when he brought that report card home? Well, Daniel Shaw. Well, Daniel had this. Or Daniel had this. Or Kyle Sims. Kyle had, in other words, there was always somebody Jeffrey could compare his report card to that made his not look as bad. All right, what was the problem? What was the problem? Wrong standard. The standard was off. And so what we find is that we learn by means of comparison that sometimes it's not always best to excel. Less people demand more of us. I'll give you one example. We'll come back to it, Lord willing, next week. Moses pulled that stunt with God. Right? I'm not a good speaker. God's like, well, who made your mouth? Who made your mouth? But God fixed it. All right, I'll go get Aaron. And then finally Moses says, go get somebody else. And that's when God got Aaron. But even in the Bible, we learned that people learned that it was not good to always excel unless somebody demands something of us that made us uncomfortable. All right, there next week.